Nicole Kidman has made her first public appearance since her split from Keith Urban.
We've been through a lot together.
We've got a timeline for it now, and the time is it's now.
Hashtag after divorce. Nicole Kidman completely exposes Keith Urban. She stayed silent for nearly 2 decades. Through the relapses, the rumors, the long separations, and the quiet unraveling of everything they had built together, Nicole Kidman said nothing. She smiled on red carpets, held his hand at award shows, and told every interviewer who asked that her marriage was stronger than ever. But now, for the first time, the silence is breaking. And what is emerging from Nicole's side of the story is painting a picture that looks nothing like the fairy tale the world was sold for 19 years. This is not a story about a Hollywood breakup. This is a story about a woman who gave everything she had to hold a marriage together, and what she found when she finally stopped. To understand where Nicole Kidman is today, you have to understand where she came from. Born in Honolulu in 1967 to Australian parents, Nicole grew up in Sydney in a household that valued discipline, education, and ambition. Her father was a clinical psychologist and biochemist. Her mother was a nurse and educator. From the outside, it looked like a stable, grounded upbringing, and in many ways it was. But young Nicole carried something that most people never saw in her later polished public persona. She was profoundly, almost painfully shy. As a child, she would flush red with embarrassment if a teacher called on her in class. She struggled to express herself in ordinary conversation. What saved her was performance. On stage, inside a character, she could feel things and say things that everyday life didn't allow. Drama classes, ballet, youth theater. These weren't hobbies for Nicole, they were survival mechanisms. By her teens, that instinct had transformed into something undeniable. The Australian film industry was growing rapidly in the 1980s, and she stepped into it early, landing her first significant role in the 1983 cult film BMX Bandits. Directors noticed immediately that she had something beyond looks. She had emotional depth that most performers spend decades trying to develop. Hollywood came calling before she was 30, and with it came Tom Cruise. Their marriage in 1990 made them one of the most photographed couples on Earth. But behind the glamour was a relationship that, by Nicole's own careful admissions over the years, came with significant complications. Scientology played a defining role in that marriage, and when it ended in 2001, Nicole did not just lose a husband. She lost day-to-day access to her 2 adopted children, Isabella and Connor. That loss carved something permanent into her. People who knew her during that period say she was devastated in a way that she never fully let the public see. The Oscar she won the following year for The Hours showed the world a woman triumphant. What it didn't show was a woman quietly grieving the family she felt had been taken from her. That grief is essential context for everything that followed. When Nicole Kidman met Keith Urban, she wasn't just looking for love. She was looking for a second chance at the life she believed she had lost. Keith Urban's story begins on the other side of the Tasman Sea. Born in Whangarei, New Zealand, in the same year as Nicole, he grew up in Queensland, Australia after his family relocated when he was still young. His father ran a convenience store but had a deep love for country music, and he passed that love directly to his son. By the age of 6, Keith was already playing guitar. By his teens, he was performing in talent shows and small venues, cultivating not just skill but an image. The brooding, restless outsider with a rock edge in a country music world that wasn't quite sure what to make of him. What Keith had in musical talent, he struggled to match in personal stability. His home life growing up carried its own tensions, and by the time fame began arriving in his 20s, he was already wrestling with alcohol and substance abuse. He moved to Nashville in the early 1990s with enormous hunger and very little safety net. After years of grinding on the circuit, his self-titled American debut album in 1999 broke through, and suddenly he was country music's new star. The tousled hair, the guitar virtuosity, the voice that ached with longing, audiences fell for him instantly. But success didn't quiet his demons. If anything, it amplified them. touring, temptation, the relentless pressure of maintaining a public image while privately struggling. All of it pushed him toward the edge he had been balancing on for years. By the time he met Nicole in 2005, he had already experienced stints in rehabilitation. He knew what rock bottom looked like. He also knew that he desperately needed something, or someone, to anchor him. Their first meeting came in January 2005 at the Day USA Gala in Los Angeles, a celebration of Australians working in Hollywood. Two people born in the same year, both carrying wounds they hadn't fully healed, both at turning points in their lives. Nicole later admitted she didn't think he was interested. He was polite but distant, and weeks passed without a call. When he finally did reach out, something shifted quickly. By May they were photographed together. By June of 2006, they were married in a candlelit ceremony at the Cardinal Soretti Memorial Chapel on Sydney's Manly Peninsula. She wore a Balenciaga gown. He serenaded her at the reception. It looked, by every measure, like the beginning of something genuinely beautiful. 4 months later, Keith checked himself into rehabilitation for alcohol abuse. Nicole had barely settled into married life before she was standing in a rehab facility, choosing whether to stay or walk away. She stayed. She visited him, supported him, and told the press nothing beyond what was necessary. When he emerged from treatment, he credited her with saving his life. And that dynamic, her as the steady one, him as the one being steadied, became the invisible architecture of their entire marriage. 4 years, the public version of their relationship was warm, affectionate, and inspiring. He thanked her at award shows with genuine emotion. She spoke about him in interviews as the person who had brought her back to life after years of pain. Their daughters, Sunday Rose born in 2008 and Faith Margaret in 2010, seemed to complete the picture. Here was Nicole Kidman, the woman who had lost a family, building a new one. Here was Keith Urban, the man who had nearly destroyed himself, finding peace. What neither of them fully acknowledged publicly was how much work it took to maintain that peace, and who was doing most of that work. Sources close to the couple, speaking in the period following the divorce filing in late 2025, have described a marriage that functioned for years on Nicole's determination more than on genuine equilibrium. She managed the household, the schedules, the children's lives, and increasingly, the emotional temperature of the relationship. She monitored his sobriety not because she was controlling by nature, but because experience had taught her that the alternative, looking away, could be catastrophic. She had watched what addiction could do. She had seen the consequences firsthand. Her vigilance was born of love and fear in equal measure. But vigilance, sustained over nearly 2 decades, becomes something else. It becomes exhaustion. It becomes resentment. And for Keith, being the subject of that vigilance, even when it came from a place of genuine care, began to feel suffocating. He reportedly wanted to be her equal, not her project. He wanted a partnership, not a dynamic in which he was permanently cast as the one who needed saving. Those close to him say he struggled with the feeling that no matter how many years of sobriety he accumulated, no matter how many stadium shows he sold out, he was still being watched and doubted. Neither of them was wrong in what they needed. That is perhaps the most heartbreaking part of the story. Nicole needed stability and consistency. Keith needed freedom and trust without condition. Those two needs are not inherently incompatible, but they require a level of communication and mutual vulnerability that, according to people familiar with their private life, the couple increasingly failed to achieve. Instead, they performed their marriage for the public with extraordinary commitment, while privately the distance between them grew year by year. By the early 2020s, observers who paid close attention began noticing small signals. She started attending more events alone. He was photographed on tour without his wedding ring. In interviews, both were careful but increasingly evasive when asked about each other. Nicole's answers shifted from enthusiastic declarations of love to quieter statements about how marriage requires hard work. Technically true, but a significant change in tone for a woman who had once gushed about her husband at every opportunity. The rumors picked up through 2023 and 2024. Anonymous sources in entertainment publications described them as living parallel lives rather than a shared one. His touring schedule kept him away for long stretches. Her film commitments took her to various locations around the world. They were seen together less and less, and when they were, something in the body language had changed. The affection was still present, but it felt practiced. Observers noted that her smiles, always so warm in earlier years, had taken on a quality that was harder to read, composed rather than spontaneous, careful rather than free. Privately, those who knew them say the real conversation had been happening for some time before the legal papers were filed. Nicole had been doing the painful calculus that people in difficult marriages eventually face, weighing what could be saved against the cost of saving it. She had fought for this marriage with everything she had. She had stood by him through the earliest crisis just months after their wedding. She had navigated years of uncertainty about his sobriety. She had carried the emotional labor of maintaining stability for herself, for him, and for their daughters. And at some point, the calculation shifted. She realized she could no longer be both a partner and a caretaker without losing herself entirely. In late September 2025, Nicole filed for divorce in Davidson County, Tennessee, citing irreconcilable differences. The legal language was minimal, but the implications were enormous. 19 years of marriage, 2 daughters, and a public love story that had given hope to millions of people who wanted to believe that real commitment could survive fame, addiction, and distance. All of it reduced to a few lines of court documentation. She filed quietly, clearly hoping to minimize the spectacle. But what followed made quiet impossible. Keith's first public concert after the filing became something far beyond a scheduled performance. At a stop on his High and Alive world tour in Pennsylvania, he took the stage without his wedding ring, a gesture so visible and so deliberate that the audience understood immediately what it meant. The set list told its own story. The Fighter, his 2016 duet believed to have been inspired by his relationship with Nicole, was removed entirely. Its absence spoke louder than any announcement. Then came the moment that sent shockwaves through both the country music world and the entertainment press. During his performance of You'll Think of Me, his 2004 song about heartbreak and endings, he altered a lyric. The original line, "Take your space and take your reasons," became, "Take your unreasonable reasons," delivered with an edge that left no doubt about its target. Fans in the audience documented it immediately. Within hours, the clip was circulating globally. It was raw and unguarded in a way that Keith Urban had rarely allowed himself to be on stage. For Nicole, watching all of this from a distance, the concert represented exactly the kind of public spectacle she had spent 2 decades trying to prevent. She had filed discreetly. She had not issued statements. She had not spoken to tabloids or friends who might speak to tabloids. And now, here was the end of her marriage being played out on a concert stage in Pennsylvania, dissected by millions of people who had only ever seen the curated version of their relationship. What Nicole has done since the filing reveals a great deal about who she is and what she has learned. She has not responded to his concert. She has not given interviews about the divorce. She has appeared in public, composed and deliberate, focused on her daughters and her work. She was photographed in Nashville walking with Sunday and Faith, her body language protective and steady. She is doing, in other words, exactly what she has always done, protecting what matters most to her and refusing to perform her pain for an audience. But the exposure she is being credited with is not the explosive kind. It is quieter and more revealing than that. It is the exposure that comes simply from walking away. For nearly 20 years, Nicole Kidman's continued presence in that marriage was the thing that kept the fairy tale intact. Her loyalty, her patience, her refusal to give up, all of it sustained the public image of a perfect love story. The moment she filed those papers, she exposed the reality that the image had been costing her something. That she had been giving far more than she was receiving. That the stability everyone admired in their relationship had been built almost entirely on her shoulders. The divorce documents themselves carry a kind of quiet testimony. She is seeking primary residential custody of their daughters, with Keith retaining joint decision-making authority. Both parties have waived spousal support. Their finances, it emerges, were largely kept separate throughout the marriage. A practical arrangement that perhaps tells its own story about the level of genuine merger in the relationship. The custody arrangement reflects the reality of their lives. Her stability versus his touring schedule. Her roots versus his restlessness. Even in its ending, the marriage is breaking along the exact lines that always defined it. People who have followed Nicole Kidman's career and personal life over the decades describe a woman defined by resilience and by a profound capacity for self-reinvention. She rebuilt after Tom Cruise. She rebuilt after years of public scrutiny that would have broken many people. She turned personal devastation into some of the most powerful performances of her generation. Not because pain made her a better actress, but because she refused to let pain be the final word. Those who know her say she is approaching this chapter the same way. Not with anger, not with the kind of public grievance that Keith's concert stage moment suggested, but with the quiet determination of someone who has survived harder things and come through them intact. She is 57 years old, one of the most respected figures in global cinema, and the mother of 2 daughters who clearly adore her. She is not defined by this ending. As for Keith Urban, the picture is more complicated. The man who stood on that Pennsylvania stage, altering lyrics and weeping through certain songs, is clearly not a man at peace. His vulnerability has always been part of his appeal. It is woven through almost every song he has ever written. But vulnerability without grounding can become its own kind of chaos. The question people close to him are now quietly asking is whether, without Nicole's steadying presence, he can maintain the equilibrium that allowed him to build the career and the life he has. She was, by his own repeated admission, the person who saved him. What happens now that she has chosen to save herself instead is something only time will answer. The story of Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban is ultimately not a simple story of a wronged woman and a flawed man. It is a story about what happens when 2 wounded people find each other, build something extraordinary together, and then discover that what they needed to heal was never something the other person could fully provide. She needed a partner who didn't require managing. He needed a love that didn't feel conditional on his stability. Neither of those needs was unreasonable. But together, over nearly 20 years, they created a dynamic that could only hold for so long. What Nicole has exposed, in the end, is not scandal. It is something more important than that. She has exposed the cost of silence, of loyalty stretched past its natural limit, of a fairy tale maintained through sheer force of will. She spent 19 years protecting a story. Now, finally, she is simply telling the truth. Not in words, but in the most powerful way available to her. She walked away. And in Hollywood, where people stay in failing marriages for decades rather than face the cameras alone, that is perhaps the most honest thing Nicole Kidman has ever